The two protagonists of Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, are Ruidry, or Red, McWraith, a Scottish man, and his love interest, Antea Duarte, an Afro-Cuban woman. It is not stated if these two are married, however, they are established very early in the story to be romantically involved. Red mentions that he is Antea's apprentice, so it can be assumed that from this relationship, they've grown quite fond of one another.
Red, you best be ready.
I'll be careful, Master Duarte. Your apprentice stands ready to serve.
Red and Antea are Banishers, ghost hunters essentially, who vow to defend the living and banish disembodied spirits of the dead. Their motto, which you can hear repeated throughout the game, life to the living and death to the dead.
Life to the living, death to the dead.
Seems to be an unbreakable oath that Banishers take, as stated by Charles Davenport, a fellow Banisher and Antea's mentor, that begins the journey for Red and Antea to travel to New Eden. Red and Antea voyage to New Eden, a 1700s North American town, in Massachusetts to be exact, that is being haunted by a particularly powerful ghost called a nightmare, which was previously thought to be just a myth. A nightmare is a particularly powerful ghost, one that was said to be too powerful to banish. Charles sent for Red and Antea as sort of a backup to help deal with this issue before he ended up dying. Finding out Charles is now dead and a ghost, Red and Antea send him to the afterlife and plan to deal with the nightmare on their own. Spoilers ahead for those that want to figure out on their own the rest of the story of the game. Attempting to take on the nightmare, Antea gets killed and Red nearly dies by being thrown off of a cliff. He's reluctantly saved by a witch named Seeker. After regaining his footing, he finds that Antea is dead and is now a ghost. Since Antea was killed by the nightmare, they must reach Antea's body in order to unbind her spirit in order for her to move on. As for what's next, it's more or less up to the player. The player is introduced in how to play the rest of the game when you meet people of New Eden who suffer from hauntings. You can either do one of three things. Ascend, which is peacefully allowing a ghost to depart to the afterlife, sort of sending them to a heaven, I use that term loosely, or some sort of a peaceful afterlife. Banish, which is to forcefully send the ghost to the underworld, which we'll talk more on later. Or the more interesting option, to blame, which is to kill and steal the soul of the living in order to complete the ritual known as the Ritual of Lesser Palingenesis.
In the schoolhouse, he joked about bringing me back to life. Is that possible?
Yes. The Ritual of Lesser Palingenesis. It's extremely difficult. Highly dangerous.
I could try, right? You'd teach me and I'd bring you back.
Red. It's an ancient ritual. It requires power. It consumes essence in large quantities. We're talking about human sacrifice. Murder.
Palingenesis, which comes from the Greek meaning rebirth or birth anew. The term can even be found in the Greek Bible or the New Testament in the book of Matthew, where Jesus describes the last days as a palingenesis, a recreation of the world during Judgment Day. The term is often used to describe the spiritual rebirth of a person in Christianity, similar or identical to being a born-again Christian, when a Christian devotes their previously sinful life to a service of faith and worshiping God. In Banishers, however, if you blame more of the living, you will complete the ritual to bring Antea back to life towards the end of the game at the literal cost of human sacrifice. If you ascend or banish the dead, then Antea will also move on to the afterlife. Though choosing to ascend more ghosts will bring out a different ending than choosing to banish more ghosts. It's up to the player and how they want to play the rest of the game. Blame and kill people to bring Antea back from the dead at a cost, or allow Antea to peacefully move on to the afterlife and allow Red to grieve. Red and Antea are a non-subtle nod to the alchemical allegory of what's known as the chemical marriage, the union of the Red King and the White Queen. Red's Scottish name, Ruidry, in Gaelic tradition actually means Red King, and while Antea's name in Latin means formerly or comes before, there is a similar name in Greek myths called Antea, which was an epithet for many Greek goddesses, mainly Rhea and Demeter. However, Antea's connection to the White Queen in alchemy is more of her name being the feminine counterpart of the male Antaeus, which means opponent or opposite, generally meaning she is the opposite and counterpart to Red or the Red King. In the chemical marriage, the Red King is the element of sulfur, the fiery and active principle, or in better terms, the conscious, while the White Queen is the element of Mercury, the passive and fixed principle, or in better terms, the subconscious. How this is shown in their character is that Red is more impulsive and impatient, connecting to his Red King's fiery nature. He will stop at nothing for Antea. He even uses a torch as one of his Banisher weapons. Antea, on the other hand, is a lot more submissive and has a defeatist attitude. She sees her death and becoming of a ghost as more or less something both Red and herself have to accept. In fact, in the Rosarium Philosophorum, or Rosary of the Philosopher's text, the White Queen says to the Red King, and I quote, "O soul," or son, "I must submit to thee," end quote. This can also play into her role as Red's master and teacher, but she seems to take more of an overly cautious and hesitant route at times. The game focuses on the dualistic nature well. In the allegory, Mercury is formless and has no definitive form, which is a clear nod to Antea being a ghost. Red, being a human, needs Antea, her spectral form and powers, in order to complete their journey back to the nightmare in New Eden. In gameplay, Antea is the literal switch and counterpart to Red, where Antea can see and traverse the land of the dead in ways Red cannot. The Auralu, also called the Void, is the underworld or land of the dead in Banishers, a place that's often associated with another faction separate from the Banishers and Witches, known as the Demonologists.
How did you, a man of position and faith, become a demonologist?
Ah, yes. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I shall explain, in the briefest manner possible. For a time, my father was a pupil of Henry Boggart, the great demonologist. He had the books, I had the aptitude. When he passed, I donned his mantle. I must protect them. I must use them to protect my people. This is my duty. This is my burden.
You see ghosts. You stroll the void as if it were your garden. You possess and share forbidden rituals. Who are you really?
I'm Lammy Haskell, and I am a man of many sciences. I am in fact a true pursuer.
That raises more questions than it answers.
What are the pillars of the universe? Which principles underpin existence? As occultists, do we change the world or scratch upon its surface? Each discipline I embrace peels back a new layer of reality. I'm yet at the beginning and see where I already stand. Amazing, no?
Demonologists are a type of occultists that dabble in necromancy and manipulating spirits, the dead, or the otherworldly.
Words work well enough. You didn't need to kill so many birds.
Demonologists use necromancy. Maybe he thought he'd bring them back when he was done.
They study the Auralu and seek that since the Auralu is a place of darkness and despair, there must be an opposing place of light and hope, a peaceful afterlife that they can achieve.
I believe in the afterlife. The proof is about us. And if the void embodies eternal despair, there must too be a place of hope. But where, I ask myself, where?
In the Auralu, there is a sort of sentient and malicious ooze that connects the land of the spirits and can breach or manifest in the material world.
Ugh, what is this thing?
Banisher rule number 4.
If it oozes, don't touch it. Another botched experiment?
The symbolism in the idea of a black goo or black ooze comes from the discovery of ancient Egyptian burial cases and coffins being covered in a mysterious black liquid. The black liquid is solid crude oil, or known as a type of bitumen, made from ingredients that were imported from outside of Egypt. It consisted of a composition of plant oils, animal fats, tree resin, and wax, so forth. The use of solid crude oil was most likely part of the burial process and was used to embalm and preserve the body during the funerary preparation ritual. Also, Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld, was sometimes referred to as the Black One. Osiris was usually depicted with black skin to signify that he was dead and decaying and in a mummified body. Mummification and burials were associated with Osiris. Egypt was also known as Kemet, which means the black land, in reference to their black soil that was left behind after the Nile would flood, causing the soil to become rich and fertile. When the Nile would overflow, alluvial silt deposits would sometimes flow into the riverbanks, which was seen as a supernatural sign of renewal and regeneration. Since then, black ooze has long been associated with the dead. Black goo has been used in many types of media and symbolize a connection to an alternate world or an afterlife, like many music videos of famous recording artists like Lady Gaga, Justin Timberlake, and Billie Eilish. Movies such as Alien and Prometheus, TV shows like The X-Files, and the Netflix show Stranger Things. Stranger Things' upside down world is actually very similar to the Araloo and Banishers. Both the Araloo and the Upside Down share the idea of a parallel universe that houses a black ooze that bleeds into the material world, affecting it in a negative way. In many modern occult circles and beliefs, black ooze is said to originate from the extraterrestrial technology, or even it being a living and conscious entity. They believe the black ooze has a will and can influence the environment around it, similar to the ooze causing the people of the Harrow's Hamlet to react strangely.
How can you be sure the void has tainted the region?
In New Eden, the threshold between our plane and this is thin. Even I, a novice, may reach the frontier and then go beyond. I also believe it happened before. Some years ago, New Eden was hit by another epidemic.
Was it the same illness?
I believe that first epidemic was caused by the porosity of the frontier between New Eden and the Araloo. Although, where theirs was an affliction of burning flesh, ours is a corruption of mind and spirit. And I believe I have found its source. There is a substance, a strange ooze. You may have noticed it. This, I believe, is the true source of the Harrow's poison. It carries a particular stink, on the scent of which I experience first confusion, then a loss of control over my limbs.
What do you expect to find at the source of the ooze?
To find a cure. The ooze seeps into our world, sickening us. I may be able to stop it. Unfortunately, I cannot reach the source. The Araloo is a formidable place. Tricky. A maze constantly evolving, changing, reshaping itself. The isthmus, for example. I found an oozing crack in the ground. The terrain then remade itself, and I can get to it no longer.
Perhaps we might be able to find a way through and take a look at that source.
There's even a section where Red and Antea become influenced by the leaking of the black ooze, affecting their behavior towards one another.
This whole country is rotten to the core.
And you're just now reaching this conclusion?
If I wanted your opinion, I'd give it to you.
Perhaps if you gave me the space to have one, then we'd both be better off. Whoever it was, looks like the ooze got him. What do you think, Antea?
You wanted the space to have your own opinion. I'm giving it to you.
This must be Antipas Gibbs. Hell of a fall to live through. Now join in any time, Antea.
What do you think I'm doing? The Gibbs were so angry. Pure entitled bigotry.
Maybe they were affected by the ooze. I mean, we've been snapping at each other since we got here. Something's toying with us.
I think they made the ooze. I don't think the ooze made them.
Fairfax Haskell, a demonologist and leader of the Harrow, accuses the happenings as coming from the devil or witches. Later to only find out that it was actually indirectly and mistakenly coming from his son, Lamentations Haskell, and more directly, Fairfax Haskell's mistreatment and blaming of Deborah being a witch, causing her death and causing her to be the nightmare of New Eden. The term Araloo comes from the real-world myth of the Mesopotamian underworld. Similar to Tartarus of the Greek and Hell of the Norse, the underworld often shared the same name with the god or goddess that ruled it. Other names of the Mesopotamian underworld are Ker, Kuku, Arali, Kigal, and what Lamentations Haskell even called the Arluan game, the Irkala. Even more directly, the Akkadian underworld is called the Atalu or Atalun. Atalu was also the name of the goddess Ereshkigal, the wife of Nergal, the Akkadian god of war who had an epithet called the Burner. More symbolism that links directly to Red and Antea, or moreover the Red King and White Queen allegory. Nergal's was known as the Destroying Flame, linking to the Red King's active and fiery attitude and again, wielding a torch. Whereas Ereshkigal was passionately in love with Nergal and submitted to him in order to save herself. Ereshkigal was Queen of the Dead, which links to Antea being a powerful ghost. Ereshkigal, much like Antea and other Banishers, was known to exorcise and expel sick possessed of evil spirits. The deepest connection to the White Queen Ereshkigal is that Ereshkigal had a syncretic counterpart and linked to the goddess of magic in Greece, Hecate, according to the Michigan Magical Papyrus. Hecate is sometimes called the Hecate Ereshkigal, and that name was used in magical words relating to the afterlife. In the chemical marriage, the White Queen is said to represent the moon as the Red King is to the sun. Hecate, being the goddess of the moon, draws a striking parallel to the White Queen and Antea's involvement with Red. Another connection I'd like to make is the Aurulu's influence from the real-world myth of the Abzu. The Abzu is a primordial freshwater ocean and the source of life in Mesopotamian myth. It's often referred to as the Abyss. The Sumerian god Enki lived in and ruled the Abzu, often symbolized as his realm in ancient Mesopotamian cosmological beliefs. I will draw more on the connections to the Abzu later. Towards the later end of the game, when traversing the Arlu one last time, you meet Kalandre. Kalandre, who will later be known as the Nazaku, was the spiritual creature that haunted Antea in her childhood when she was in Cuba. It's interesting because Kalandre seems to be the only spirit being in the game that isn't a ghost.
This thing was never human, Red. Don't indulge it.
Antea states that Kalandre was never once human. Earlier in the game, Seeker mentions that Antea wasted her potential by becoming a Banisher and could have once become a witch instead.
You're young.
You're dead.
I meant your essence is strong for one your age. How did you come to be here?
How did you come to waste your potential by being a Banisher?
Death to the dead.
Is that so?
When talking to Kalandre in a flashback, Antea had a doll that she would pretend to be a witch, running away from Spanish soldiers.
I like your doll. What are you doing?
This is Aleja. She is a witch, and she is running away from the Spanish soldiers. She had a horse, but he died. He was an old friend.
Maybe we can build her a raft.
I'm Antea. What's your name?
This is most likely a reference to Antea growing up in the Atlantic slave trade and her family either being slaves or at least just very poor. Antea would mock her mother, telling her that they need to be twice as good to even get half of what others get, but Kalandre would push Antea to rebel and become more negative.
Patience, Antea. You know that we have to be twice as good as them to get half of what they have. I can't stand anymore.
I think your mother is jealous of you.
I'm better than she was at my age. Of course she is.
We could train in secret. Practice when she's not looking.
Antea, being of Afro-Cuban descent, was likely exposed to Santeria, an Afro-Cuban religion developed during the slave trade that combines Roman Catholic and West African Yoruba traditions, or even Palo Mayombe, which is referenced as the dark side of Santeria. Antea seems to have once participated in scarification, a common West African tribal body modification that represents goodwill and wisdom. She has 3 scars under each of her eyes and the same set of 3 scars on her forehead, on her widow's peak. Santeria is often confused with and understandably misidentified as voodoo, as they share very similar commonalities. Calandre tricked Antea into burning her house down and almost killing her family.
Mama? Mama!
It's just a game.
What's going on?
Go on. Burn them. Burn her.
What are you?
Our house burned, but we lived.
Free yourself, Antea. Let the fire melt your shackles.
Antea, probably in her untapped magical power, somehow banished Calandre without knowing how.
I banished her without knowing how. Back then, I didn't know what she was. It's here, leading us somewhere we don't want to go.
When revealing her true form to Red, Calandre calls herself Nezuko, the relentless servant of the Queen of Kur.
My name is Nezuko, and I am the relentless servant of the Queen of Kur.
As stated before, Kur is the Mesopotamian underworld, and the Queen of Kur is likely another reference to Erish Kegel. There's actually a post on the Banishers subreddit made by the user Kiriagao, hope I pronounced that right, who insinuates that Nezuko is probably Namtar, the evil demon of death who is the servant of Erish Kegel. These are great guesses, and they're probably correct, as they link to Calandre's relationship to Antea on the theory that Antea is the White Queen in the chemical allegory, who shares a loose connection to Erish Kegel. My theory, however, is Nezuko is either one of two beings. Lamashtu, a demonic goddess of Mesopotamian mythology that was associated with child deaths and harming of mothers, which would explain why she would prey on a young Antea and teach her to both disrespect and nearly kill her own mother and family. Lamashtu was a demon or evil goddess of the Abzu, as mentioned before, is most likely an inspiration for the Auralu. Lamashtu in particular acted malevolent on her own accord, separate from enacting on instruction from the will of the gods. She also was written in cuneiform determinative, which both insinuates she possessed deity. However, still being in the domain of Erish Kegel's underworld, she was still her servant by association. Or, Nezuko is most likely a manifestation of an Ajogun, negative and destructive spiritual forces from Yoruba or Afro-Cuban religion that can cause suffering and death. Ajoguns did not have an earthly life or physical form, much like the Nezuko. Nezuko is probably more specifically Iku, the Ajogun of death, or probably Epe, the Ajogun of hatred, likely latching on to Antea from her time in slavery or discrimination to spread hatred and misery.